This year, Fish is going to be 40 years old. And to celebrate, we are going to do a reunion with all of you alumni, every generation back on the beach for one more Assateague retreat. But we know that this is also a big ask, to return to the beach, to camp again after so many years, to interrupt busy lives. It's a lot. But we're asking because we think there's a lot more to be offered here than just nostalgia. Let me explain. A while ago, I was visiting with a friend from my old youth group, and we actually got out a big stack of pictures and started going through them, and as we were doing it, we started playing a little game in which we try and figure out when they were taken, put them in a big timeline and go through. And anytime we would land on a photo of one of us, we would say what we would say to them now if we could go back in time. And at one point, my friend stops, and she just says, "Man, it feels like life is so much bigger when you can look back at it like this. It's too bad all we have is forward." That for a lot of us, in all that forwardness, it's getting harder and harder for it to have the sense of joy or purpose or meaning that we were told that it should. It's almost as if the faster we are able to go forward, the more we just kind of feel the flatness of it all. In fact, there's a yearly survey called the MTF that's done every year. It's been done since the 70s, and it's surveyed millions of people under the age of 30. And one of the interesting things that they found, especially in the last 15 years or so, is that we are safer, we are better educated, we are more justice-minded, we are more successful in most ways, except there's been a rise in depression and anxiety and a sense of meaninglessness and loneliness in ways that we have never seen it before. And it's happening at younger and younger ages. Could it be that we are so steeped in this idea or image of life as a path that we've also convinced ourselves that the point of it is to move down it as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Our finances, our career, our organizations, our family, we want the best for them, but the point of them becomes, how do I make them bigger and better than they were before? The only way that we know how to give life meaning and purpose and beauty is to then just move it forward. This is also why we can't seem to stop consuming our planet to death. Because even if movement is destructive, it's better than the alternative. It's better than being still. Or, it also makes sense why so many of us are so steeped in a constant sense of anxiety. Because what if something gets in our way? What if something changes the path? There's a sense that we stop becoming who we are meant to be. But so many of the spiritual traditions, the sages and the wisdom teachers who came before us, they actually describe life in a completely different way. One example is in the Hebrew scriptures. There's a story of a man named Jacob. One of the first things we see him do is he lies and he tricks his father into allowing him to steal his brother's birthright, the blessing that says what he will be. And in the ancient Near East, your name and your father's blessing, your connection to your tribe, it was everything. And so for him to do this would have been absolutely unthinkable. So when his brother finds out, and Jacob has to leave his home, his family, his tribe, it's a kind of death. Because at this time, you need to understand, people had what is called a cyclical view of history. In the same way that the days, the phases of the moon, the seasons move in a predictable cycle, so do our lives, and so does all of history. And so you, who you are, if it is not connected to your people's story, to the generations that came before you and the generations that came after you, if you are not receiving and building and passing on, then you are nothing. Because the thing that gave your life meaning was how you were connected to the cycles. How you and your small story was a part of a much bigger story that you get to join in on. So when Jacob leaves, it is saying something, that something new is actually possible, that all of history does not need to repeat itself, that new paths and new possibilities can and will be made. But then something really interesting happens. He's sitting by a river and he sends the rest of his family away, and it says that that night he began to wrestle with a man. All night long they struggled against each other. And in the morning the man says, "What is your name?" And when Jacob tells him, the man says, "Now your name is Israel, because you have struggled with God." And the rabbis would even suggest that it was Jacob wrestling with himself. How many of us have been wrestling with ourselves? Moving down this path, being pulled forward by grace, we're unsure what is the next right thing to do. How many of us feel the flatness of life, but don't know what to do with it? And here is my point for us. From there, Jacob goes back and he actually meets his brother on the road. And instead of a fight, his brother embraces him. There's this sense that Jacob's story wasn't finished until he had returned to where it began. There's a sense that Jacob didn't actually know who he was until someone else could affirm it in him, till he could see himself and how he had changed, who he had become in the place that he once was. For the ancient wisdom teachers, for so many of these spiritual traditions, including the Jesus tradition, life is not a path that you run down, it is a circle that you travel in. A set of cycles that are in line with the rest of life. That is what gives meaning. Because a straight line can never have a center. And you can never know where yours is until you complete the circle. So we are doing an Assateague reunion and inviting all of you back, partly because it's going to be an incredible amount of fun, but also to give the opportunity to close some of those circles, to return to some of those centers. Because oftentimes we don't understand what the story is until we return back to its beginning. We are inviting you back with the stories that you've lived into. So if you feel a bit lost right now, or if life feels like it's growing an anxious flatness, or even if your path is just beautiful and rising fast and forward, you are invited here, because maybe it's time to remember where your center is, or maybe it's time to help complete the circle so that others can find theirs as well. Fish Assateague Reunion 2020. Return to the circle, return to the center.